did my presentation on Our Day of Grace by Jim Shepard. So, I was first intrigued when I saw the way the story was formatted, as the story was being told by various letters, something that was unique to the story compared to the other short stories. Upon reading and seeing how the story was unfolding, just from the first few pages, I could already predict the ending. And although it was kind of predictable, the story and passion in the characters' writing kept me interested and wanting to see how it would play out. So there's actually three narrators in total, all told in the first-person point of view. One of the narrators is a soldier in the Civil War and describes his days in the letters. The other two narrators are a soldier's wife and a soldier's girlfriend, describing their time at home and longing for their loved ones. So there are multiple settings too, since there are letters from different people. But the time is through Monday, November 21st, 1864, through Wednesday, November 30th, 1864. And one of the main characters is Haiti, and she is set in a town in Virginia called Front Royal. And the other main character is Lucy, and she is in a town called Boone in North Carolina. The setting for the soldiers moves around, starting from camp near Tennessee River to ending up in Franklin, Tennessee. And since this story is based on the Civil War, there are real people in the story, and one of them is General Hood. And you could see on this map where he was traveling with the soldiers. And in the end, on November 30th, they end up in Franklin, Tennessee. So the three main soldiers fighting for the Confederacy, C.W., William, and Georgie, struggle with life in the battlefield. Meanwhile, the lovers of C.W. and William have their own struggles at home, having been apart from their loved ones for so long. Both William, his girlfriend Lucy, and the wife of C.W., Haiti, anxiously wait for the letters of the others as conditions outside and the moods worsen. One of the main characters is C.W. We are never given his full name. He's only referred to by his wife and messmate in the letters as C.W. Throughout the story we never see his wife receive a letter from him, so his appearance in the story comes from what William describes. From what his friend described, William writes, he seems to appreciate the letters his wife sends, as he says, he claims Georgie's tomfooleries and his wife's letters to be his only remedies. This makes it even stranger for the reason he doesn't send his wife a letter. It seems that perhaps the horrors that he had witnessed and done would be too much to write back to his wife. He thought strongly about the war, saying he despised the North. And when William was slow to volunteering for the war, he sent me a petticoat in the mail. And a petticoat is pretty much a woman's light, loose undergarment that is worn under a dress or a skirt. So he pretty much just called William a woman for not volunteering for the war quickly. C.W. changes quite drastically throughout the story, and in the end, his hopes are gone and his beliefs change, as he considers that it may be best that both nations be destroyed for their corruptions, which is really drastic from what we see in the beginning of the story. The other main character is Haiti, and she is a mother of two boys and is the wife of C.W., who had been together for 9 years. She deeply cares about her husband and is depressed by his absence. She writes to him, I feel so widowed that I stay at home mostly. Our nights together come back as sad as the sleet and as sweet as the heavens. Throughout all her letters, she mentions her love for her husband and the emptiness that she feels without him. So you could really see that she seems to have true love for her husband. William, he is the lover of Lucy, and he had been fighting the war for 2 years and 2 months. When describing his time before joining the war, he said, I remember wondering if I wished to be that teacher who watched the seasons pass while laboring mightily to success to drill some wisdom into wayward heads. We can see that he was thinking of becoming a teacher. He is humorous and writes in his letters his love for Lucy. He seems regretful for not showing much more of his love for her when he had the chance. And Lucy is a 20-year-old lover of William. She lives with her father and her sister Nellie. She is well educated and seems to read often to pass the time. She is also assertive in reminding William to write to her. She seems to not have regarded much of William's fascination for her, and seems to have wished that William would have proposed. So Georgie, he is a relatively short man, also fighting in the war. He is described as a good-spirited person who regularly makes people laugh. CW compares him to a loaf of bread and fresh beef, as those are very valuable objects for the soldiers, as fresh food is hard to come by, showing how important laughter is in those dark times, as they are as important as food. In the end of the story, after seeing so much death and perhaps believing his comes close, Georgie is described as having wept at every rest and interval. This description of his is quite drastically different than how he was described in the beginning, as a joking and happy fellow. And so there are other characters as well, such as Nellie and her father. And Nellie is the sister of Lucy. They go through their own struggles as well, like when Nellie stops her piano playing and droops down, presumably crying. And then CW's son Welly, who didn't want to write to him at first, but then after hearing the news that Hood was about to send the soldiers on a direct assault, seemed to have regretted not doing so. And then Asa, CW's son, was described to have coughed so hard that he threw up his breakfast, showing how sickness has been really affecting those even out of the war. So the style of the writing has the rhetoric used in 1864 and is largely non-colloquial. The author uses a lot of metaphors throughout the story, and a prime example of style would be the sentence, "Whiskers have grown out all over, and I am ashamed to scan a looking glass." So he calls his whiskers pretty much beard. His beard pretty much whiskers. Right? And he calls a mirror a looking glass, something that we don't really use to call mirrors anymore. So the conflict in the story is mainly the lack of food, the weather, the longing for their loved ones, and the Federals. We lived 3 days on parched corn, and then the last week in the rain and mud, just 2 biscuits a day to each man. So throughout the story, we keep hearing about how they just have lack of food. Even those that are still home eat quite a few, very small amount of food. And so food is very scarce for the soldiers. There are accounts that they had to search and scavenge for the food and hunt for the food, like they had to catch a bunny to eat. So it's really something that they struggle with, as well as the weather, as it keeps snowing and raining, and just the weather was just not on their side, definitely. The boys beside me had his brains scattered all over us. So it's definitely the conflict of death. There's a lot of death in this, especially because the soldiers are fighting on the other side. So death is something that they had to worry about, and having seen someone's brain scattered all over yourself is definitely something that affects their mentality. You may not suppose I ever go to our warm bed without thinking about you. And of course there's the conflict of not being with their lover, especially for 2 years and 2 months. It's a very long time to be apart from someone you truly care about. The war is brutal and has been affecting the mood of the soldiers drastically. CW, in a fury, bayoneted a boy and then dragged the boy's body onto the road so that the hospital wagons would make a jelly of his remains. This is far more than just killing a person. It's mutilating a boy's body for revenge. So we could definitely see how this war has been affecting their mentality. For someone to be doing something to somebody else's body, even if they're on the other side, is definitely proof that they've just been struggling so much that this is just something that they did. In the end, Hood's the general is planning on a direct assault on the Federals, something that was deemed a dangerous move by everyone. In the final words of the story, William is quickly writing to Lucy his regrets of not showing more of himself to her, and speaks in such a manner that seems as if he knows what his fate will come to. So there really isn't a resolution in this story. We are left in a cliffhanger as to what happens, but because the story is based on true events in which the soldiers fighting in Franklin, Tennessee on November 30th, where half of the Confederacy died that day on direct assault into the Federals, based on these odds, we can only assume that William, CW, and Georgie had perished, or maybe they could have possibly lived, but there was just half of them dying. I think it was a little less than half surviving, so the odds aren't with them. So Haiti, the wife of CW, seemed to be handling her loved one being gone the worst. In one letter, she describes how little Henry Rhodes, only just in the service, had been killed. His poor mother is almost crazy. This seemed to almost be a foreshadowing at how she herself is going to react if her husband CW dies. Although we don't know for certain if he will die in the battle on November 30th, but we can assume that if he does, that Haiti won't take the news very well and might go crazy as well. So this title for the book is Our Day of Grace, and the dictionary describes our Day of Grace as the time of probation, when the offer of divine forgiveness is made and may be accepted. And so CW says it may be that our country's Day of Grace is past. And so he might mean by this is that after doing such terrible things, that they feel that as if they won't be able to be forgiven, as if what they did was just too much to be forgiven. Yeah. So the themes in this story is the destruction of war and people who have family that they care for and love, the terrible things that they have to endure, and the emptiness and sadness the family has to endure as well without their soldiers home. So I actually think this story was is an effective short story. I think it, in such a short amount of time, Shepard does a very good job at giving the characters personalities and having such an emotional development between them from the beginning of the story to the end. It was enjoyable to read, and the fact that it's based on historical events makes the cliffhanger even better, as we can make a better prediction as to what happens. So thank you for watching.